This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. How hot is the job market in the U.S., Amy?
How hot is it?
It's so hot that Michael Rotundo is going back to work.
Michael Rotundo, the 30-year-old, who, by the way, today's eviction day for him, and we'll get to that later.
Stay-at-home son.
Oh my gosh, you're right, the stay-at-home son.
He wants to get in on this action. 223 happy jobs, 23,000 happy jobs created in the month of May. Unemployment rate fell to 3.8%. I only mention the unemployment rate because I want to remind you that it is a meaningless statistic and metric, so ignore it. But 223,000 jobs created. Wage growth up 0.3%, which is better than expected, and consistent with what James Freeman reported in Wall Street Journal yesterday. The National Federation of Independent Businesses Employment Survey, NFIB survey, that came out yesterday, 35% of owners of small firms report increasing labor compensation, the highest percentage since NFIB started asking the survey question in about 1986, so in 30-plus years. So everything's coming up dollar signs, except for Trump's taxing trade. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Scott the Cow Guy, Scott Shellady, Fox Business contributor. There he is.
There's a hefty.
Yeah.
I was going to let you guys know that I had. I'm not in the state right now, so I had my free Rod T-shirt on, but it didn't go over well because they thought I was giving something away, so I had to take it off.
Yeah.
Why do I want a Rod?
I'll have some of that Rod that you're giving. Yeah. There you go. So, Scott, 223,000 jobs and the all-important wage growth bump.
I'm starting to lose my patience. You already referenced the fact that the unemployment number is garbage. And I'm starting to think these people we're putting back to work on a monthly basis is still not very good. I know that we did see the wages tick up a little bit, but only slightly more than we expected. So if we really do have all these people going back to work, 5% is considered full employment, really, by most economists, if you believe them. How come we can't grow? Our growth rate is so slow. We can't print a 3% GDP annually, and something's not right to have this many people going back to work. Wages apparently looking better, and the CEOs that you referenced earlier are about to pay all these people a lot more money. Our productivity is so bad, and you know what? The real important number is this labor force participation rate, and it hasn't budged under Trump. It's still at the Obama, bad year lows, and until really that gets going, we're going to kind of stay in this slower for longer than a lot of us think we can handle.
What is the labor force participation rate?
Well, it's just how many people are participating.
Right, no, but I'm saying, what's it at?
62.
62.7, yeah. But it's been high as 67. And for basically every 1/10 of a percent, it's around 2 million people. So when things are going good, we can get it up there, 65, 66, 67%. Right now, it's sub 63, which is basically where it was with Obama. So we're just not making any productivity gains, hence we're not making any GDP gains. So all these other numbers are just nicer curtains on a bad house, not even a bad block.
Speaking of bad houses, an interesting piece by a couple of scholars at the American Enterprise Institute who wrote extensively about the real estate bubble that was blown up and burst in 2008 prior to and subsequently. And, we learned so much from and had so much fun in 2008, the government's doing it again. And now the difference this time is, of course, the catastrophe stands to be bigger because now you have government agencies, Fannie and Freddie, guaranteeing 80% of all home purchase mortgages, which is a bigger number than prior to the 2008 collapse. And they argue that, easy credit is a part of the problem. Again, mortgage underwriters should tighten their standards, they argue, reinstitute debt-to-income limits that are more conservative. And just basically, they suggest that the unsustainable pace of home price inflation is only going to be stopped by damming the flood of government mortgage credit, and to not do so is to repeat all of the bad results of 2008 and maybe on an even bigger scale. Is that a concern of yours?
Yes, it is, and we saw those numbers. Actually, the leverage was eclipsed probably even 2 years ago. So we went through some of those bad government numbers like a hot knife through butter already, and they've only just ballooned and gotten worse. That is part of my concern. The housing crisis. I just don't see the volume of houses moving as much though. That's so I'm not. A lot of people still are underwater from 2008. There's a lot of folks that are rather, they're redoing their kitchens rather than move and the things like that. So I don't feel like, the strippers in Vegas are owning 5 and 6 houses right now. Okay, so
that's the test.
That's the test. That's the litmus test, right? So when you start to see that, and although they're being put out of work by technology as well, so that could be another issue anyway. But
robots,
some people still like the real thing.
Yeah.
Stormy Daniels would disagree with you. I'd have to
there you go. Well, maybe she's got 6 houses. Then we should, we start to worry. But I just don't see the volume as much as I did back in 05 and 06, trading hands and that the worry that things are going to get away from you because, this lower and slower for longer is probably really still going to be with us, and a lot of things. One of them is going to be interest rates. Everybody's worrying about things getting ahead of us as far as inflation and rate hikes and interest rates going up. I just don't think that's going to happen because we're just not growing. We're not producing anything. Yes, our economy looks a little bit better than everybody else's, but we're definitely not killing it. So if we're not killing it, and a lot of guys want to talk it up and say things are hunky-dory, but at the end of the day, we can't print a 3% GDP annually, and that's going to be a problem. We're all talking 4% after these tax cuts and getting rid of some of these regulations and the likes, but it's taken its time to come through, and we're still not putting that labor force participation rate back to where it needs to be. So I say this. We still have some systemic problems. There's a leak in the economic system somewhere, and that's Powell's job to figure out where it's at because right now the numbers that we're seeing aren't jiving with what we're smelling.
Now, new tariffs imposed, 25% steel, 10% on aluminum. Our allies are upset. Canada, Mexico, the EU. How is this going to affect the everyday American?
Probably not that much. I mean, Wilbur Ross can put you to sleep, whenever he talks, but
he's human Ambien.
Maybe he was talking to Roseanne, right? I don't know.
Exactly.
But, he tends to fall asleep when he's talking as well.
So I think not that much. I mean, I was surprised to hear. I'm actually in London right now, but there was a decent radio show on this morning about all the things that just came through as far as the tariffs and the tariff tantrum per se, about how much outside of the U.S. support there was for Trump on a lot of this stuff, and the jealousy in some of these other countries about, hey, why don't we have a guy that's running our country, to the best of its ability rather than everybody else's. Pretty interesting to hear. So, and I also then looked at the trade surplus and budget, back and forth, and there really isn't a ton there. And number two, let's just take Britain, for example, 15% of their steel goes to the U.S., so 25% of 15% is going up. That's not that big of a deal either. So, ultimately, I think Wilbur Ross is right. It'll all settle down, and they'll sort something else out down the road, and it will be all forgotten by 4th of July.
What if you're like me and you put yourself to sleep every night by knocking out a case of Labatt's Blue?
Well, you're going to have to, as my father did in his retirement, you're going to have to move to Busch Light. I'm sorry.
Well,
you're going to have to make sacrifices.
I appreciate.
Schlitz Dark is lovely this time of year.
It's
a summer beer.
It salves the wound to hear it from you, Scott.
Well, that's when I figured out in the cooler section of your aisle in the Jewels or wherever you go at Dominic's. The cheapest ones are sold, at the far right of which I did not know until I finally found Busch Light down there and I figured it all out. That's where they let the real good stuff go.
It's a great insight. Thank you for that.
All right.
Here's the issue though of this administration moving away from Larry Kudlow and going full Ross, Lighthizer, Navarro. How much potential danger is there in terms of growth? And by the way, the left is embracing socialism, is ignoring the 20th century, and you have Trump and some of his advisors embracing mercantilism and ignoring the last 5 centuries. So concern about not learning the lessons of the impacts of bad ideas.
Well, you're right, and there's bad ideas on both sides, and now that we've got, the left, all they can come and think of now that there has been maybe some sort of swell in support for Trump, at least inside of the U.S., is that, guaranteed government jobs, a new deal when we don't really need one, right? I mean, that's going to be their new mantra, and guaranteed basic minimum wage for people who even aren't working, or like the fellow that you're talking about that got thrown out of his parents' house today. Yeah, I would say that these nationalistic, populistic platforms, like what Trump's rolling out right now, generally speaking, would hurt you if you're growing at 5%. How much is it going to hurt when we're growing at 2.6? I mean, really? I just don't. They're not big enough and concentrated enough in one area that it's really going to have that big of an impact, and that's why, like him or not, Wilbur Ross is probably right. It's sooner than later this will all be forgotten. It'll be water under the bridge, and away we go, because we're still just not growing that much anyway. So if we tick down a tenth, no one's going to notice.
He is Scott Shellady, Fox Business contributor. Scott, the cow guy, thanks so much for joining us as usual. Appreciate it.
All right, have a good weekend.
You too.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.